Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Carl Moore, and I'm an associate professor of mechanical engineering at Florida A&M, Florida State University College of Engineering. And you are here to hear a great panel discussion. The title of it is Get It Right, and our focus is on making the transition from undergrad to grad school and basically just having the right mindset to be a successful graduate student. We have a great set of panelists here to speak with us and to the students. And there's no need, this is not a situation where we're going to have presentations, so you don't have to hold your questions to the end. I have some, of course, questions prepared for the panelists, but at any time, I'm hoping that if you're viewing that you can just raise your hand or just jump in and ask a question, and we're going to hopefully get some great information today. So as we get started, I want to basically just have each of the panel members introduce themselves, maybe tell us where you got your degrees and something about you, maybe a hobby or something else you want us to know. And also, of course, where you're currently teaching and doing research. And I actually, we do have one panelist who is not an academic right now. And so obviously give us what you're working on also. Let's go ahead and start with Dr. Haney.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you great.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Anisha Chaney. I recently graduated in 2016, hence the reminder to myself that I'm not a doctor. But I got my master's and PhD from Florida A&M, the FAMU-FSU College of Engineering in 2016, this past summer. I got my bachelor's degree from Clemson University in, 2021 for the PhD, 2016 for my bachelor's. Material Science and Engineering. I now work at the Air Force Research Laboratory, where I oversee the polymer additive manufacturing labs. So I oversee the actual labs, and I also oversee all the additive projects under the polymers group. So, hello.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dr. Tapia.
Hi, I'm Lydia Tapia. I'm an associate professor at the University of New Mexico, and my route to being a professor was starting with a bachelor's in computer science at Tulane, taking a year off before I decided where I wanted to actually apply to graduate school. So I worked at the national labs for a year while I applied, and then after that I went to Texas A&M for my PhD. And graduated in 2009, got the opportunity to do a postdoc in computational chemistry at UT Austin. And from there applied to faculty positions and am now here at University of New Mexico. And the exciting news is I'm actually going to be the next department chair starting in a few months. So it's a little scary and exciting.
That's great.
It is very exciting. Thank you.
Good.
So my research, I guess I'll tell you really quick, my research is in robotics. So I look at motion planning, any type of motion simulation, how one thing gets, a high dimensional thing gets from one point to another. So we have lots of applications in robotics and then in computational chemistry and also in video games. So we look at how motion in video games can be sped up and how humans can interact with it as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Dr. Henry.
I'm Segun Henry, associate professor in mechanical engineering at MIT. I did my undergrad at FAMU. Then I went to MIT, did a master's and PhD. After that, I got a job at Georgia Tech as a professor, but I actually did not start immediately. So I got the job in 2009. And I ended up deferring it for 3 years. During those 3 years, I went first to Oak Ridge National Labs, did a postdoc there. Then I went to Northwestern University, did a postdoc there. Then I did another almost a year at the Department of Energy in the Advanced Research Projects Agency. And then I started at Georgia Tech. I was there for 6 years and then got recruited to MIT as I was nearing the point of tenure, and been now at MIT for coming up on 4 years. And so now I have tenure at MIT. In terms of the stuff I work on, so my research is kind of twofold. We have two very different things that we do. One is sort of my bread and butter from my PhD research, which is simulating atomic motion and studying heat transfer at the atomic level, the physics of heat transfer. So that's kind of very sciencey physics stuff that we publish. You know, probably the majority of my papers are in that area. And then the other, I would say maybe now 70% of what I do now is more so on the side of first of a kind prototype development for technologies that hopefully can move the needle on climate change. So one is on, and then the expertise is really in high temperature heat transfer and energy systems. And so we work on a technology we call thermal batteries. I just very excited. I just founded my first company called Thermal Battery Corporation. So we're spinning that out of the lab.
Congratulations, which is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And that involves the storage of electricity as extremely high temperature heat above 2000 degrees Celsius. And then the second technology is, we call it methane pyrolysis. It's a hydrogen production technology that splits methane into hydrogen and solid carbon. And we have a reactor now that's working. So that is also likely to possibly spin out as a company in the next year as well.
That's great. Great. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into some of these questions, and you guys just not going to, point to any one of you per se. Just if you want to go ahead and answer, that's great. If you want to pass to the next person, that's fine also. And of course, the students who are online can jump in at any time. The first thing I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you wish you'd known or someone had told you about grad school?
I guess I've got one. It took me a while to learn. Grad school is really about learning to do stuff for yourself. And I know that sounds like so like, of course you're always doing stuff for yourself, but it's really not about, you have to make your advisor happy. Like if my students are like not listening to what I say, I'm like, this is not a good thing. But it's really about doing stuff for yourself, like asking questions for yourself and pursuing the answers to those questions for yourself, and learning to take, like, not necessarily work yourself like crazy so that you're unhealthy in that. So you learn to balance like your work with what you need to do personally, and you also learn to, make progress because it makes you happy and makes you interested in these concepts. So it's something I always tell my students, like grad school is really, when you get ready to graduate grad school, you know how to like do things for yourself and not with your advisor kind of guiding you. And that's kind of the point you want to get to in grad school. And I think that's the most exciting thing when I see a student that's come from like, what do I do now? What do I do now? And then by the time they're ready to graduate, they're independent and they know how to do things for themselves. That's really exciting. So I wish people would tell you, because you always think, okay, if I just check the boxes, because I'm really good at passing classes, then I'm going to be really great at grad school. And it's really kind of different. It's like you can check the boxes, but you also have to be inquisitive and learn to do stuff for yourself.
I agree. That is a big, that can be a huge change, because I think a lot of the graduate students were excellent undergraduates. And so they had great skills at, listening, maybe not regurgitating, but giving back to the professor what they knew he or she wanted, right, on exams and reports. But now it's kind of a different world.
It is.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else?
I have something I'll add. That's it's not so. I was very fortunate, in part from Carl and other faculty that at FAMU that I think did a really, really excellent job of preparing me for grad school. So thank you, Carl, for advice you gave me as an undergrad. But also Makola was very, very instrumental.
Right.
But one thing that I won't say it's something you guys missed, but it was something that I'll say is an important lesson I learned in grad school was really, and it's hard to put a finger. I'm still learning how to articulate this, but I've seen a number of other students in grad school struggling with this. But it's really the I'll say it's kind of an acceptance of what it really means to immerse yourself in your subject matter and become a true expert. Like I fought that, and as I was going through it, like I was pretty hell bent on making sure I maintained and upheld an identity that I had prior to grad school. Meaning, like, you know, like I had accepted that I wanted to be a professor, but the image of a professor was someone with the coat with the little patches and not an image that I saw myself being, you know. And Macola actually played a huge role in this, in the sense that it meant a lot to me to see Macola in his office as a professor, you know, wearing sweatpants and sneakers because he just came from playing basketball, you know, bumping some Rakim and his feet up on the desk. Like that image for me was very, very powerful, because it for me meant like I could do that, you know. I can if I'm good at this stuff and I can look like that and be who I am, then I can do this job. And so by the time I got to grad school, I was really, I mean, at MIT in particular, you know, to kind of put it bluntly, like there's a lot of weirdos, you know. And so I was really hell bent on like maintaining, like, I am not a weirdo. I am not going to be like all these other people I see around me. And in doing that, I had this wall up where I was restricting myself from really allowing myself to immerse myself deeper into the knowledge, because I was trying to, I don't want to say I was trying to front, but I was trying to fight, like, you know, like I would be in my room, and the reality is the work, you know, kept me up at night. Like I might have some thoughts in the middle of the night, and instead of getting up and going, I had a board in my room, instead of going, and I didn't want to be like somebody I could envision on a movie that's like a beautiful mind. He's up in the middle of the night writing equations on the board, and like I'm fighting that perception. But in reality, that's what I wanted to do and what I needed to do. And it took me some years before I was willing to accept, like, I can still be me and do that. And once I kind of got to that point, like a whole nother kind of aspect of my abilities kind of opened up, where I wasn't so I didn't struggle with like that duality, and it just became like that's me. Like I do both, you know. I make beats, I listen to hip hop, I do all of that, but at the same time, like I could get up from my MPC and go start jotting something on the board, because that's what I'm thinking about. And I had to kind of merge that and be okay with the fact that those things can coexist.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Dr. Haney, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off that, kind of flipping it a little bit, that process of becoming like that subject matter expert for me, was just a little stressful, kind of all those thoughts coming in at one time and just trying to balance and figure out what the next step was. I think one thing I wish I would have known was kind of, not that grad school was stressful, I didn't know the level of stress that I would kind of endure, but with that being said, it's just that, yeah, managing that stress can be done, and just understanding that, kind of getting to that point of kind of knowing everything about your subject can be a lot to handle. So yeah.
Well, you've only been out like not quite a year yet, right? So
Right.
I'm hoping that stress is finally leaving your orbit, but we will see, and we will hear about it. Oh, I just wanted to make one quick point before we go forward, because Dr. Henry was mentioning Macola, and some of the students may not know, but Dr. Macola Abdullah was Dr. Henry's advisor at Florida A&M. He was here at the College of Engineering at that time. He got his undergraduate degree at Howard and his PhD at Northwestern, and now he is the president of Virginia State University. And so just kind of wanted to put that out there for those who may not know him. Okay, next question. Did you ever consider changing your graduate program or research focus?
Does that include quitting, or?
Yes, it does. I think quitting would qualify. Yes, ma'am.
I can actually tell my story. I was in grad school, and I actually had I had a severe illness, and I was actually out of grad school for about 6 months, just because of the illness and everything taking place. And, you know, my doctors are like, I don't know if you can actually go back. Like, they were not super supportive. And like, I don't know, like being away from it made it hard, and it made it maybe want to go back. I really wanted to continue, and having to fight through that to want to go back. You know, I've been through bad advisors when I during my graduate career, I switched advisors, and those things make you want to quit. Like, you think about quitting in grad school all the time, not to make it sound horrible. You're like, why are you putting yourself through this torture? Now I see why. Like, I have like the fruits of all of that, and it's so amazing. But just during it, it's really hard. And you know, I've suffered through, you know, bad advisors and illness and everything, and having to fight to come back. And I do think, you know, even sticking to it and being like that person that wants to write on your whiteboard, you know, I love my whiteboards and just being able to think and do things. It's really nice, and knowing who you are and being able to persevere through that. I think it's really amazing. And I would just, you know that you're not alone if you kind of get those feelings to quit.
I agree. I think that I saw a number of students go through that when I was in grad school, and I had my own bout with that at a point where I was transitioning from master's to PhD, and I had kind of an inkling of a PhD project, but I was just kind of nervous about that next step and getting into that research. And it really kind of just, it put me I ended up being in a frame of mind where I just didn't want to start. You know, I was just kind of thinking about it a lot, not really writing anything down, just kind of mulling it over and really getting myself into kind of a rut. And then I said, well, I needed to do something. So I'll start talking to other advisors and think about switching advisors and switching projects. And when I finally went to meet with someone, I'll never forget, he listened to my story and he said, Carl, you know what? And I said, what? He says, maybe you ought to just get started with your research. And that hit me. And I was like, I was nervous about something I hadn't even really gotten fully into yet. And so I took that advice, and it was great advice. So I understand what a lot of people are going through when they get to that point where they're just not sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right.
I definitely considered, I guess, yeah, I think we've all thought about quitting at some point, just get so stressed. But I was fortunate enough to choose a research topic that I definitely loved from start to finish. But I have seen a lot of my colleagues who definitely, they change it completely, or they go to a different, program. But I still love additive manufacturing, and yeah, still doing it now.
Great. I see in the chat, someone wrote, this is a very serious, I guess they mean the topic is a very serious one for international students. And so I could imagine that to be the case, because oftentimes as an international student, you're able to stay in the country because you're in school. And so if you think about quitting, that could have even larger ramifications, right? No question about it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is publishing for a graduate student? And do you have any suggestions about paper writing as a grad student? Well, Dr. Haney, you're still up on the screen. Maybe you should, or at least on my screen, maybe you should go ahead and start on that question.
Yes, I guess I had already thought about this because you sent the questions ahead. So I would say a 7 would be my rating for that. But I think that when we think about paper writing, we think about mostly, impact factor and how many publications did you, publish. But I think more so it should be viewed in the sense of communicating your science. And I think that any scientist that can effectively communicate what they're doing is a good scientist. So with that being said, I think equally, or not equally, but a little less similarly as important is going to conferences and giving talks and just being able to network and just tell people, what you're working on, because then from there, then the collaborations can come and you can, expand your topics and learn more and see how you can work with other people. So paper writing is important, mainly in my opinion, because it's a way to showcase that you've effectively communicated, your ideas. So.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd probably put it at a 9 or a 10, particularly as a grad student, because as a grad student, publications are the currency of academia. And so if you don't have any, then like kind of nobody believes you. And so you have to do it. I'm thankfully at a stage now where I don't really care about it. I just do it because it's good for my students at this point. But when you're as a grad student, it's key. It's critical. It's what the success of your PhD will be judged by your publications. So like, for example, if I saw a CV from somebody and they could talk a good game, only one, but if I see like 0 publications, then it's like nobody else has looked at your work. Nobody else has verified that anything you did was right. And so that's like a key box you have to check. I mean, you don't need a Nature paper, you don't need like, super high impact factor kind of publications per se, but I will say not having any registers is bad. So you definitely have to publish. You have to check the box in some regard. And it can be what helps sell you. I mean, if you've got a high impact publication, great, that can make people pay more attention to what you have to say. But I would say, like, in terms of like whether or not publishing at all, like if that's the question, then it's a 10. You have to publish, otherwise, people will say you didn't do anything.
Exactly.
I can give some practical advice too, because I totally agree with what they're saying. It's totally important, and I hope we didn't just stress you out. Like, you have to publish to graduate. It's not as bad as it sounds. Some hints I give grad students is typically to get involved in a paper that somebody else that's more senior is working on. So that helps you understand what's involved in a paper, what content goes in it. Maybe you're running experiments for them and not necessarily doing the whole paper, but then you get really exposed in that whole paper writing process and learn the whole system. When you get a little further along, I have my students actually always pick a goal. I want to submit something to whatever our venue is for our discipline. So they pick a goal, and even if they don't make that goal, they at least know that they were working toward it, and then it's kind of a revolving deadline. So they don't beat themselves up because they didn't make it, but they, once you miss, if you don't make that deadline, which you don't always the first time, then you pick another deadline and kind of just make some goals for yourself so that you continue progressing towards that paper writing goal. And it does get easier. My students get shocked by the time they get ready to graduate. It's like they're getting 2-3 papers out a year, and that's when they're graduating, like in their final years. But just know that it takes a while to get there. And so there's these little steps that take you along that process to get to there.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition. I'm gonna jump. How about the importance of goal setting? Anybody else want to speak on that, and goal setting in terms of not just papers, but even in terms of your research endeavors?
I would say goal setting is foundational. If you don't have a goal, you just kind of end up meandering and trying out stuff and seeing where you go. And I'll say it this way, I remember going to a workshop, and someone was claiming to have like plotted or aggregated some data about NSF proposals, and like how soon the word explore shows up in the proposal. And like the likelihood of funding dramatically drops off the earlier you use the word explore. And so I think that, we often use that term in thinking about research, but, mentally we may be exploring ideas, but when it comes to practically what you want to do, you need to have a plan. In order to have a plan, you got to have a goal, you got to have a set of objectives. And so, it's as one of my students said, he has now a famous quote in our group, which is that's how research goes. It doesn't work until it does, and then we move on to something else. Yes, you'll try things and there's stuff to learn and it's not going to work, and that's okay. That's research, but you should have some objective. You should have some goal of what you want it to do. And if you learn that it's not going to do that, or it doesn't work the way you thought it did, great. That's new knowledge. That's exactly what you're supposed to do, is create new knowledge and tell us all why what we thought made sense didn't.
Right. I think that whole idea of having a goal, even if it's something that you miss, right? You may miss it the first few tries out. You're on a path, you have a plan. And even I would say, and this is kind of just dovetailing on what you guys said, but just the whole idea of setting the goal requires some thought and some planning, right? And so that's good, right? So you're not just, like you said, meandering. And this whole thing of setting a goal for a paper, I've seen it multiple times, because the conferences that we're going to are normally the same time a year, right? Each year. And so you wait, and then you set a goal for that particular conference, and you don't quite hit it, but you've gotten a lot of writing and a lot of work done ahead of that. And either you're going to wait a whole year, or you're going to add and finish it up and submit it somewhere else. But the fact that you were going for it means a lot more. You got a lot further than you would have gotten. So I definitely agree with what you guys are saying there. This question is an interesting one. I've kind of dealt with this a number of times as a faculty member throughout the years. So I'm going to kind of state it as a student speaking. Like, picture this is a student in one of your groups. Or Dr. Haney, this is maybe a young engineer who's just joining under you. And they're saying that the other people in the lab seem to be moving faster than they are. How can they deal with this feeling of just being behind all the time? They submit a paper or they submit some kind of work to you, and it comes back all red. So how should they deal with that type of frustration? Dr. Henry, I'm not even sure, the student comes to you, they're feeling that maybe they shouldn't even be in your group, because everybody in your group seems so, so awesome. And here you are cutting up all their writing.
Well, that's so I usually don't have that problem, because I make the students read each other's papers first before it gets to me. So they get all the red from each other first, and then I try not to read a paper. I don't want them to send it to me until they feel like it's ready. They're ready to push submit and submit it to the journal. So I have the good fortune of having enough group members where there's enough internal critique that happens before I devote my own time to it. But to maybe more generally to the point, I do get this this concern, but I don't know, the students that I've dealt with have there's definitely a sense of like, yeah, I'm not, there can be a bit of intimidation, but I think it's I try to lay out the expectations early. Like, no, part of the reason I don't really like to take master students, and a lot of faculty don't like to take master students, they're only going to be around for 2 years. And it's going to take you like 2 years to get up and running anyway, to like start to become productive. Like there's a significant ramp up period. So the expectations are not that you're going to start churning out papers after a year or so. Like it takes longer than that. And so I think for me, I try to set those expectations of students early. Like, my expectations that you're going to come in and you're going to learn, and you're going to get up to speed. And after maybe a year, you've got some things you can do independently. And then after 2 years, you've got your own ideas and we're running with it, but none of those result in publications after 2 years. That's like you're starting to be productive after 2 years. And that's why a PhD takes longer, because now 2 years of ramp up, and now you got maybe 3 years of productivity that come after that. So, I just try to help set expectations, but other faculty, may have more aggressive expectations, particularly if it depends on the nature of the research, In my case, a lot of the stuff we're doing is not stuff you would have ever learned anywhere else. So there's no way for you to learn it before you have to learn on the job.
Good. Anybody else want to add to that?
Nope, I totally agree. It's all different for people, and and it just, and it depends on the discipline. In robotics, we move a little bit faster, but it's not just because we have so many conference potential deadlines and students get on projects earlier. But yes, it depends on the discipline, and everybody's different.
Yeah. What about students? Let's talk about work schedule. And Dr. Haney, in terms of like even your schedule when you were here, is as a student gets started and kind of tries to manage how much time they're in the lab, and are they dedicating enough time to their research? do you guys see it as kind of a 9-to-5 job or kind of an all the time job, or does it fluctuate depending on the student? What do you think?
I definitely think it fluctuates depending on the student. I personally was one of my mentors in undergrad kind of taught me, even in undergrad, was to treat it like a 9-to-5. So, some period of time you're consistently coming to work, hopefully about 5 days a week. And then you take that time off also to rest, which is really important. So with an employer, you come and they pay you, and then they expect some outcomes. So I kind of see grad school the same way. When you put that time into work, you're going to get something out of it. So if you're consistently showing up, then you're going to produce more than likely. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I'll say the culture in my group is maybe not normal. We have very extreme fluctuations. So
Very extreme.
very extreme. So there are tests that we run. The sponsor wants 10, 12 hours of data. So we're in the lab the entire night. We had one not too long ago. It was a 4-hour test. It took them 48 hours to get to this point where we could even run the test continually in the lab. Then, I showed up at like 10 p.m. when we were about to start it. And then we had to do a first 4 hours. So at like 2 a.m. is when we were finally about to actually take the data for 4 hours. And so we were in the lab till 8 a.m. the next morning. And, but it's a ton of work. It's like 6 months of prep work that are more like 9-to-5 days, so to speak, that ramped up to that. So there can be wild fluctuations, at least in my group. I think it's, again, very much indicative of the type of work and the style. My general thing I try to do with students is I particularly look for students that are sufficiently passionate and motivated enough where it's not even a conversation that we have. They are dedicated enough to the work that they will do whatever it takes to move it forward. And I've been very, very fortunate to find students that are on that page. And I personally tend to stay away from students that are looking for a 9-to-5. This is my group in particular is not a 9-to-5, nowhere close to it. And so, yeah, I don't set any hours for anybody. We work based on progress. So it's like within the next week, here's how far we need to have moved. However you budget your time in the next week is up to you.
Yeah. Do you see fluctuations in terms of summer versus school year?
Yeah, if anything, the summer is the time we get it in the hardest because nobody's taking classes. That's the opportunity to make the most progress on the research. And in general, again, some of this is like the culture at MIT, and I don't know how it is elsewhere, but like we don't generally at MIT, like we don't want to hear about your classes. Like don't come to me talking about your, like you handle your classes, and all we talk about is research. So, it's kind of like there's a certain again, this is culture, so I don't know to what extent it's translatable, but yeah, like we expect students to take the classes you need to get up and running to contribute to you doing the research, and beyond that, we'll celebrate and have a little thing when you pass the qualifying exams, but other than that, like just talk about the work.
Dr. Tapia?
Yeah. So yeah, he's totally right. It's dependent on the group. So when I have a grad student starting in my group, I tell them this is like the most flexible job you will ever have. So I have certain expectations that I expect from my students. Like if you have a mentor, you should overlap your schedule with your mentor as much as possible. So that way, like when you're starting out, you have somebody in the lab you can always go to. You guys can talk, even if you want to talk every day or run questions by them. How do I do X or Y? You have somebody there in the lab that's going to be able to help you out. You can make meetings. You're aware of, if you're working towards papers, you're aware of those deadlines. You keep track of them yourself. But if you need a day off in the middle of the week, I always feel grad students should be able to do that. Like take that day off in the middle of the week. You're responsible for, just getting what your goals are for that week done, whatever those goals are that you set for yourself, and then you have some longer term goals that fit towards the research project, kind of like the experiments that you're talking about running every night, like overnight. Like we may have something like that we may have to run, but at least it's computational or on the robotic system, so it's not quite so driven by schedule. So it really depends. I also tell students it depends on the advisor. So some advisors I know here at UNM don't expect students to necessarily come in every day. Maybe they work from home, or maybe they do other things. So it's really important to find an advisor that works in the same way you do, that has that expectation of you that you feel that you can meet. So, whether it's my group where you really like that more interaction with people, or where it's like kind of more goal oriented, or other advisors that are more hands off, you'll see that, and that'll be, you'll see that in the schedule they expect from you. So it's
I
going to be
agree with you. I definitely agree that in many ways, I did work for a while in corporate America, and I had the feeling as a grad student that it was more flexible than the corporate lifestyle. So I've told a number of my students that, grad school isn't the worst time in the world to, have things going on in your life that are significant. Grad student, and when I was in grad school, a number of us were married. It was people were getting married in grad school, and some of my students were like, well, that's weird. How do they manage that? I was like, well, listen, once you start working, you're going to find that your time is just or more regimented than it is as a grad student. Have you guys had any students in your labs that were settled down, that were married?
Yeah, several of my students are married, have kids. Grad school is I feel like it's a nice time for that, because you can balance, your schedule's pretty flexible, so you can balance a lot of the stuff that's going on.
Okay, great. In terms of, let me see here. Are there techniques that you have used that have helped grad students remain productive? And this kind of falls in line with a lot of what we've talked about in terms of goal setting, but helps students remain productive even when life happens, which we know is going to occur, right? All kinds of things happen. Dr. Tapia, you mentioned earlier that you had gotten sick at one point during your grad school career. So what kind of techniques have you seen that help students kind of keep things moving in the right direction, even when life seems to be going on and not always in the best way?
Super great. Yeah, no, I'm totally good at this one, because I had to do it myself, and I teach it to all the students that struggle. Always try to commit 10 hours a week to something you're doing towards your degree, like your research. So whether it's reading papers or doing something, I always tell students, if you spend less than 10 hours a week on any kind of progress towards your degree, then you're really going to you're going to get so behind, it's going to be hard to catch up. So it doesn't have to be coding or writing papers or the thing you find the most challenging. But if you spend a little bit of time every week and kind of keep up with that progress, it keeps you from getting really behind, and so that you feel like you can't catch up. It's like my secret key. Like if you're spending less than 10 hours in a week, then you're probably going to feel behind, and things are going to get worse, not better. I also have them list out kind of goals in each area. So depending on what challenges them, writing. Some of my students struggle with writing. Some of them struggle with, coding, setting up experiments, like maybe working with hardware, since we do that too. Some of my students struggle with, analyzing results, like whatever it is, really find out what that weakness is and make sure that you're not avoiding it, so that you spend at least a little bit of time each week on that challenge goal. So one of my students, excellent researcher, excellent at implementing these amazing machine learning systems, but has a really hard time writing. So he's a little more advanced, so he's not on the reduced time plan, but he spends 2 hours a day writing. What's his goal? I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to, and keep progressing on the thing that I find challenging. And it's actually gone a lot better. So even with that, over the past few months, we worked on a paper recently, and he was able to contribute much more significantly than he had been able to in the past. So I think just kind of these, I know it's more goal setting, but it's like more targeted goal setting on what's challenging you.
Right, not avoiding those things that have been difficult, right? Because
Exactly.
we know there's plenty of, you can spend all of your time doing the stuff that you love to do. And then when you turn around, the thing that, right, you have to finish that other thing that you don't love to do as much or you're not as good at. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Anybody else?
Yeah, if I could add, I don't have a great solution to this. I have one student that stands out that struggled. We tried a number of things. I think it kind of worked. I tried to push the student to adopt less of a time-based model for how they spend their time in terms of like allocating, oh, I'm going to do this for this many hours or whatever, but instead to take a task-oriented approach where it's like, here's what has to get done today, period. And you don't get to go to bed until this is done. And we eventually got granular down to the point where I had him sending me an email every day with what he's going to accomplish that day. And that during the times, he would slack, like he would do it for a week or two and then he would stop. But during that 2 weeks when he was doing it, he was productive. And so, he struggled with, I think, analysis paralysis, where he would just kind of go over the same thing over and over and really ask so many questions about the result he's seeing that he didn't really progress and do the next step. And a lot of the challenges he would have is like just relinquishing that and realizing like whether you answer this or not, it makes no difference. Like let it go. It actually doesn't make any difference in the end. And so with that student, I think that an approach where, and this is more so how I used to operate when I was in grad school. I just had each day I had like I would just write a couple bullets of like, here's what's got to get done today. And if I can get it done quick, great. I go home early and I enjoy having an earlier day off. And then some days I'm in there until 2, 3 a.m. because it's not done until it's done. But by setting that, I managed to finish my degrees on the faster side. So, I did, I guess, master's and PhD in 5 years. So I think that kind of style, at least for me, worked pretty well.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Okay. In terms of the dissertation and starting to write, this falls in line with a lot of the goal setting and things we've been talking about. I just kind of want to get a feel from you guys, what you normally do, or maybe for Dr. Haney, what you did. Was the dissertation something that you knew after a certain period of time, after certain things were done, you were going to be ready to start writing it? Or is it something where at some point your advisor said, hey, look, I think you've done enough, let's start writing? How do you guys see that? When is a student ready to say, or what are some indicators that a student is ready to start writing their dissertation?
Yeah, I definitely didn't think I was ready to start writing. My advisor kind of pushed it, said, okay, I think you have enough to kind of go forward with it. Obviously, publications, usually the way he kind of pitched it was, multiple publications to kind of build that story. So, different chapters will align with certain publications. So if you have those publications, you can kind of just start, writing your story. And then once that story is complete, then you're ready to go. But I definitely, even with publications, I didn't feel like I was ready to write. And you just have to start. But FAMU-FSU has the nice system set up, which is similar, I'm assuming, to other universities where, you have your prospectus, which kind of helps kind of give you that foundation of kind of what your plan is. And then going forward with the dissertation, if you try to follow that prospectus outline the best you can, usually it works out. And if you guys don't know, the students on the call, within that prospectus, you kind of outline what your predicted publications will be. So the prospectus is a good thing, I would say, to get done relatively early if the preliminary data is there. Because it really helps to kind of keep you on track. So,
okay. All right, to give you kind of that map, so to speak, to the future. Let's see, great discussion. Okay, go ahead. Anybody else?
I just agree. It's publications really make it possible. So then you just put them in each chapter and you're just writing the intro. And it's not too bad.
I do like that. I've seen many professors talk of that method, kind of. You got the papers and the papers were organized and we kind of scheduled, this is what we were going to publish. And then that becomes versus like we don't have much. And so what are we going to put together in terms of the dissertation, right? It's much more difficult. Dr. Henry, do you have a idea along these lines?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so to me, there's kind of like, there's what it appears to be, and then there's like what it really is on the back end. So what it often appears to be is like, yeah, you got this plan, we go execute the research, and then you write your thesis, right? But in reality, on the back end, like what prompts a dissertation getting written is usually like funding is about to end. So it's like, we need to wrap this up. You need to take what you have and let's turn it into a good story and get you out. So, you know, that often is a very big motivator for a dissertation getting written, because a lot of times when a student's productive, like we'd like to keep riding the train. It's like, yeah, keep going, you know, or the student's really motivated to get out and they got a job or they got something they want to do. Those are the things that kind of tend to prompt it. But yeah, I mean, what I often find or think of our job as a faculty member is it's like, you know, you work on a variety of stuff during the course of a graduate degree. And then like my job is to figure out how to cobble it together in some coherent story and make it like a coherent thing. Like we presented in the thesis, like we thought of all this on day one, and then like, here's the stuff that we chose to do. And it's like, it's rarely like that. Rarely is it like, it's a lot of different things and things that they're related, and you kind of piece together a coherent story.
Good point. Yeah, let's get down to the real, so to speak. Right?
Yeah.
Not the theory. Well, I have a couple
Totally
of other questions right before I conclude, but I wanted to just stop here just in case I've been, you know, going so fast that maybe, does anybody have a question in the audience or maybe want to write something in the chat?
I had a question.
Go ahead, Danielle.
I'm sorry, I'm in the lab right now, so it's a little loud in here. But I was wondering how you guys kind of treat like vacationing per se. We were talking about juggling our time and like, you know, living a life outside of my PhD that I'm currently doing. So it's like, are you pro vacation, or is it like is it okay for me to leave for like 2 weeks at a time, come back, or like, is summer break still a thing? You know, things like that.
So it depends on the advisor in the group. Typically though, like it's been said before, summer is the time to make the most progress on your research, right? So typically you're actually pushing a lot on research on the breaks. So even we just had spring break and my students were all here in the lab working on papers and stuff. So that sounds horribly miserable. But one of the best vacations I had as a grad student was a super cheap mid-semester trip to Mexico. Because I had no papers due, and I was like, you know what? And I have no classes. I'm in grad school. I'm going to take my vacation just when I can. And I think that is important. Like I've noticed even just on my own students, when they typically, I have some students it affects differently, but most of them, when they take vacation, they take that time off, they come back ready to work, and that's always good for them, and it's always good for the research. So you know, I'm very supportive of that as long as it's reasonable. You know, I tell them also it's like the most flexible job. I know I've said that before. So think of it as a job. Don't take off like excessive vacation. You know, unless it's arranged, unless, you know, I saved up my vacation for like a year, so I need to go visit my family out of the country or something like that. But, you know, you should feel like, you know, when you're at the point you get to managing your deadlines, managing what you have to do in terms of experiments, in terms of your research, you should feel like you can take that, you know, take advantage of that cheap vacation you can book in the middle of the semester because nobody else can travel in the school year.
Exactly. Anybody else? Anybody else have a question for one of the panelists, or one of the panelists want to jump in on that answer?
I would just say, and again, this again may be a bit of a cultural thing at MIT, particularly, and even I would say also it's probably the case at Georgia Tech. We kind of have the opposite problem where, you know, students are generally pretty stressed out, working very, very hard all the time. So if anything, whenever a student brings up a vacation, I'm very much encouraging that they should take it, that they should take time off. Because usually the students are just like really, really gung-ho about the work and constantly working anyway, working too much to begin with.
Good question, Danielle, though. It was really good. I was just saying it was a good question.
Great question.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience have something to add or a question? Okay, I don't want to have too much dead time. You know, I'm taught as a teacher that I'm always supposed to wait 10 seconds, and I'm always amazed in class. Right when I get to number 9, I see 2 or 3 hands go up. So I'm apologizing ahead of time if I'm not giving you guys enough time to formulate your questions. So I think you guys have kind of answered what else grad students should be doing, but I just want to make sure that we really put a pin in that one. Things to remain healthy, or, you know, what other things do you think grad students should be doing? And I'm saying besides their, you know, what we know a grad student career is, you know, the writing and the research. What other things do you think they should be focused on while they're in school? And for me, I would say, to kind of give you guys an idea, like I tell my students, they should be working out. You know, if they're the kind of person who's always loved to go to the gym or love to play, like I have a student now who is in my class who likes playing cricket, right? Like, you need to get out and do some of those things just to kind of let off steam. What would you guys say about these items? Go ahead, Dr. Haney.
I definitely agree with the physical activity. I know for me, my lab work just consisted of standing kind of at the bench for long periods of time, or sitting at the desk for long periods of time. So when I'm moving and active, you know, my mental health is better, I feel better, and I can be more productive. So definitely working out and just being active outside of the lab is super important. But outside of that, kind of piggybacking off what I said earlier, I think that attending conferences and networking is really key. We kind of tending it in a bubble, especially if you have like a larger group, just kind of only knowing your lab mates, only talking to them, and kind of getting submersed into, you know, your field. But I think collaborations, kind of making an effort to collaborate in graduate school, is could kind of put you ahead of the game as far as maybe some of your other colleagues. But just understanding that, to me, in my opinion, science kind of only progresses when we kind of collaborate. We can't all just kind of stay in our bubbles and expect to make progress. So in grad school, attending those conferences, attending other talks, maybe a topic that you may not know too much about, and just see if you learn something, and networking, and then starting, you know, sooner than later, thinking about, you know, maybe what industry you want to go into, whether it be academia or private industry, and just you know, getting a feel for what you want to do. Also, with that being said, I just remembered internships. I know some professors may not be too excited about that, but taking time off to maybe, you know, explore just industry and the job scene, and just, you know, getting your hands into other things outside of your in-house lab.
You know what, Dr. Hagy, that's a great transition. And let's stay on that for a second. In terms of students starting to think about their future career, right? I mean, maybe it's never too early to think like that, especially if you're considering either a postdoc position or going into industry of some type. How was that for you? When did you start considering what would be your future after grad school?
So I think I knew early that I didn't want to be in academia, just because I kind of knew that I kind of wanted a more, I guess, product development type setting, kind of more closer to the customer type work. but I actually did an internship during my PhD for about 8 months. I was at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is where I work now. And that's when I kind of started getting the feel for, what life would be like after graduate school. So I shadowed a lot of postdocs during that time, and a lot of that work actually went into my dissertation. So I was fortunate enough to where Wright-Patterson was allowed me to take that content and those results and include it in my dissertation, which is a plus. But yeah, early on, my professor and my advisor pushed for conferences and just networking in general. My advisor was he's very loquacious, very talkative kind of guy, very high energy. So that's kind of his personality too. So I was fortunate for that experience.
Great. That sounds good.
Yeah, if I could add to that, that was going to be my suggestion for what students need to do in addition to keeping active and doing things outside work. Figuring out what your career trajectory is going to be, and I usually have the conversation with students a bit even more generally, which is really just about like what is your life purpose, because a lot of students come to grad school without a real plan for their life, without a real objective or direction, and leave this issue of, well, what, it's kind of like, do I want to go to academia, do I want to go to national lab, do I want to go to industry? And it's kind of like we should start with a more foundational question, which is like, what is the purpose of your life in general? Like, and I think the key thing that I found is it's very important, and it's totally fine if the conclusion of that actually has nothing to do with what you've chosen to pursue for graduate work. Like, I had a student back at Georgia Tech, and we went through this whole back and forth, and she was majoring in the undergrad as environmental engineering. After some more prodding, I eventually kind of realized that she said she really wanted to do mechanical engineering, but she said, but I don't know how to draw. So she thought that not being able to draw was a reason she shouldn't do mechanical engineering. So I had to kind of correct that perception.
Uh-huh.
And then as we went even further, then it kind of, eventually she settled on, actually, really what I really want to do is I want to work on women's issues. And I'm very passionate about being an activist for women's rights. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I mean, if you so choose, you can still do a degree in engineering if you want. I mean, it's so important for you to know that that's what your life's mission is. And you can just use this as a job. You can support yourself as an engineer, but it's going to do you, so many favors for you to be clear that you're just using this as a means to an end. That way you won't look up 10 years, 20 years in and be like, why am I still doing this? This is not really my, just admit it to yourself now. Engineering is not your life's purpose. That's okay. It's just use it as a job. Everybody else has a job. I don't think working at Burger King is anybody's life's purpose, right? It's a means to an end. And so it's okay to treat engineering or even something you get with an advanced degree as a means to an end. If you've got some other pursuit in life that matters more to you, that you wanna really invest your time and your energy and your life force into.
So that's awesome. That's awesome information. I agree with you. I think that after those 5 years or so are up, you have something nobody can take away from you. It's worth something, but that does not mean that you have to continue to work in that area. So that's great advice. And we're almost to the end, and I just want to give Dr. Tapia a chance to answer that same question about when students should be looking and thinking about their career.
Muted. I think you think about it the whole way through. It's really about, I always felt like it was my big career debate going through graduate school was this, do I want to go into industry or do I want to go into academia? And academia, like you see your professors and you get a little scared and you're like, that's like a lot of work and very different. And you have to bring in money and it all looks super intimidating, but it was really for me like trying to understand if I wanted to value that, being able to dictate my own research agenda and decide what I wanted to work on versus not. And how important was that to me going through all of graduate school trying to, and I felt like it was this life or death decision. Like I would go around every year, like, I don't know what I want to do when I graduate. I'm not sure. I'm just so stressed out. And then when it gets worse as you get closer to the end. And you know what? It didn't really matter in the end. I picked one that I knew I thought I would be, I didn't know, I thought I would be successful at. And you know, I negotiated so that I would have the resources to be like that I thought I would need to be successful in that position. And you know, I tend to follow the waves, but I make smart choices while I'm following the waves. So you know, I would just say, think about it, but don't stress yourself out. Like there's really, you get your PhD, there's no real wrong answer there. You can do lots of stuff now. So it opens doors.
It definitely opens doors. And I want to thank you guys just for being a great panel. I mean, I think you guys gave some awesome information that people can use, that students can use to help them propel themselves for a successful career in graduate school and on afterwards. So thank you very much. And this recording will be available on YouTube for students who were not able to make it or just want to see something afterwards. But thank you all. Thank you for participating, and I will see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.